Hi friends, welcome back to the Holistic Health Podcast, a topic that is actually one of my favourites to talk about. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Tell you why?
Yeah.
Well, I think that PMDD is, I reckon it's underdiagnosed and underreported. And I would have said that I've fit the diagnostic criteria at times in my life for it. And how debilitating it is when you're in it is really horrible. And there are some really challenging statistics around it. So some of them, I actually wrote them down because I'm not a numbers stats person, but 20 to 30% of people experience PMS, which is different to PMDD, which we'll get into shortly. And around 3 to 9%, which is a broad percent because there's a lot of mixed data on it, experience PMDD. And people with PMDD are 4 times more likely to report suicidal thoughts and 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. And I think if someone hasn't experienced severe PMS or PMDD, it's really hard to... It's similar to period pain. So it's really hard to relate to something that you do have an experience of, as in, most women of menstruating age have a period. So they can be like, well, I have a period and yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable, but it's not that painful. Similar, most women have a cycle and they might feel, I think it's the stats around 70 to 80% of people, feel mild, emotional or physical change in the lead up to their period that colloquially they might say is I'm PMSing. But I think that there are people out there, and if you're one of them, you're probably listening to this episode, but also if you're not and you're listening to this episode and you have someone in your life that really does suffer, I think it's really important to validate the experience, because for a lot of people, that experience of the lead up to their period is almost like an out-of-body experience. And it is like being in the depths of a significant mental illness for a defined period of time and being able to watch yourself behave, feel, act in a certain way while feeling like you have no control over it. And if we think about how often we cycle in a year, and the fact that that window of time for some people is up to 2 weeks. It's half,
Half your life.
Yeah, half your life. Not really mathematical, but it's roughly half your life. And that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. So I guess before we go any further, we should probably define PMDD in terms of what is the current diagnostic criteria so we can differentiate between that and PMS.
Yeah, good idea. I think if you haven't experienced PMDD, it can be easy to assume it's just bad PMS. But that's like saying, I don't know, let's just call it the gross understatement of the century. It's really not fair to think it's just simply a more exaggerated version of that. So according to the DSM-4, it's the medical Bible really of diagnostic criteria for all diseases or conditions. And it is a collection of at least 5 symptoms, including at least one that is considered affective, meaning it affects you in this way. And the presence of these symptoms occur in the luteal phase, so post-ovulation, and can resolve, will resolve once the period arrives. And it also will prevent normal functioning. And I think that's perhaps one of the elements that really allows us to pinpoint the difference between PMS and PMDD, because PMS, although your mood might be impacted and you might not necessarily like how out of control you feel in terms of the way you conduct yourself, you can still function. Whereas with PMDD, it's really interrupts function. So the list of affective symptoms, to be super precise, are irritability or anger, a depressed mood, feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness and rejection sensitivity, anxiety and tension, a sense of being overwhelmed or out of control, lethargy, which is just feeling super tired, and either hypersomnia or insomnia. So most people be familiar with what insomnia is, so being unable to sleep. There's many different types of insomnia, but hypersomnia is just chronically sleeping, like wanting to be asleep all the time. Now, obviously with the lethargy, that kind of loss of energy, that somewhat makes sense, but they might be so profoundly impacted they just can't get out of bed. And it's not even that they're chilling out in bed watching Netflix, it's they are asleep. They can't sort of stay awake. So you only require, well, you have to have at least one of those. And I think, again, what's tricky about utilizing this is you could argue that that's PMS too, but it's just it's how profoundly exaggerated these symptoms are and how much they impact your ability to actually do the normal functions of life. Now, along with that, there are often physical symptoms, so mastalgia or sore breasts, bloating, weight gain, body aches, joint and muscle pains, and marked food cravings and changes in appetite. So it's tricky, premenstrual disorders, if we just want to use the umbrella term PMS, are a diagnosis of exclusion. So when you've ruled out other reasons for those symptoms, it kind of then just gets lumped in that basket. We also have to consider like other mood disorders and other general medical conditions, but typically this is like the most extreme form of PMS that can occur as early as just right after ovulation, but certainly during that luteal phase before the period's due. And then it's like a switch goes off. Once the period arrives, people will report, oh, I feel normal again. I feel like myself again. I'm back in control, or my mood's normal, or my anxiety is, I can cope with my anxiety if they're typically anxious, as opposed to feeling absolutely debilitated by it. So look, if you are suffering from PMDD, please know this is not the same as PMS, and we know that to be true. And if anyone's made you feel that way, we're both sending you a big hug, because that obviously makes things feel so much worse. But when it comes to PMDD, I think one of the reasons why it's so poorly addressed is because, like a lot of things in allopathic medicine, it's like symptomatic treatment. And I think in order to be able to really address it, you've got to understand what's even causing it, like what's driving PMDD. So like anything, there's often multiple variables, but there are some major threads to follow, right?
Yeah, there are. And I think on the train of diagnosis, one thing I think that's so important that women can do to help themselves is to keep a diary about this, because so often, because it is cyclical, people can kind of have that really horrible experience, have that switch just flick and go back to quote unquote like their normal self, and then forget how bad it was. And also, if you happen to walk into a doctor's office at a time when you're not in the thick of it, because you maybe made an appointment in the thick of it, and then you happen to actually go to the doctor once you're back to your normal self, it's really easy for it to be missed. So I really would encourage you, if you don't currently have a diagnosis of it, but you're suspecting it, or you've just, a lot of those things that Amie just rattled off are, really like, you're like, I feel so seen. Then start to keep a diary. I actually tell people one of the easiest ways to do it, if you're someone who already tracks their cycle in an app, is make sure your app has like a journal or a notes section, and every day just pop in a little note of how you felt. If you're more of like a paper and pen person, then buy a journal, have the dates on there and the days, and just keep a little bit of a physical and mood symptom diary across a cycle. You don't have to analyze it, just record it. I can't tell you how helpful that is as a practitioner for starters, but also it's really helpful for you to identify, is this a pattern where it is very distinct of, I have no issues in 2 weeks of the month, and then I have all of the issues for 2 weeks of the month. Because there's also another condition, and I'm forgetting the terminology of it right off the top of my head, but it's another separate quite diagnosable condition. So many out there. Everyone loves a label, but that is when you get an exacerbation of pre-existing mental health challenges in that PMS window, but that is different to PMDD. So in going back to the drivers and understanding the theories, so currently there are two predominant theories as far as what's causing PMDD. It's under-researched, as most female health issues are. It's a very challenging thing to conduct studies on that are well done because it requires cycle tracking, multiple tests, and sometimes science doesn't want to do that. But anyway, what we do know is one of the theories is that it's driven by a decline in estrogen levels in the late luteal phase. So kind of just before you get your period, your estrogen, for all of us, does drop. Like it goes from higher to lower and then you get your period. And that decline in estrogen in people with PMDD triggers off a dysregulation in the serotonin system. And so many of you may be familiar with serotonin being like your happy hormone or a hormone that really positively contributes to your mood. And we won't go into the mechanisms of how that does it. It's through lots of different transporters, but it's just important to know that it does in these people. The other theory is that there's an increased sensitivity to the rise and the fall of something called allopregnenolone, or allo for short, which is a metabolite or a breakdown product of progesterone, which is what many of you know we produce after ovulation predominantly. And part of what drives that change is basically like changes to progesterone in the luteal phase. So and it's the changeability that is important, because something I want to really clear up for people is that PMDD is not necessarily a condition of hormone imbalance. Hormone imbalances can exist in PMDD, as in you can have too much estrogen, not enough estrogen, too much progesterone, not enough progesterone. But you can also have, and many people do have, normal levels, and there's research being done on this, normal levels of hormones, as in of estrogen and progesterone, but a hypersensitivity to the normal hormonal shifts that change the way that your brain is responding to that. So that's why if you've been to the doctor or you've even had a consult with a naturopath, let's say, or a nutritionist, and they've looked at your hormones and they're like, oh, actually, like your hormones all look fine, it looks in balance, but your lived experience in the lead up to your period is what we've just described. It does not mean that you don't have PMDD. It means that the overt levels of the hormone levels may not be the primary driver in your situation. And so it's important that you know that, so that you're not being gaslit intentionally or unintentionally out of, looking further into that and getting further support. The other thing that I would say is that, just going back to the progesterone stuff, is that whenever we're talking about anything related to progesterone, we also want to know or investigate why is there changeability in progesterone. So things like stress, hyperlactin, calorie deficits, as in like chronically under eating, or probably those are the primary drivers, I would say. There are many others like nutrient deficiencies as well, but the ones that I see the most are probably those in that cohort. Those are things that are going to influence your experience of PMDD or those cycles, not just in that cycle, but in the cycles that follow that. We're often looking at hormones being not just a reflection of only that month. We do often say it's your monthly report card for simplicity, and it's not that that's untrue, but it's not the complete truth of the fact that your cycle, this cycle, is already influencing your cycle, the next cycle, and the cycle after that. So it's something that if you really need to be looking at those factors across the board, across not just 1 month, but 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and perhaps like your lifestyle, so to speak. So yeah, I think the takeaways from that clinically is make sure you test your hormones, but also know that if they are normal, that doesn't mean that you've got nothing to work on. It just means that that part of it is not the thing that needs to be addressed for you. But if you do have a hormonal imbalance, that definitely should be addressed, because I've actually seen for some clients, not all of them, they have got a diagnosis of PMDD. We do test their hormones, and it has been as simple as estrogen excess or progesterone deficiency or low estrogen across the board and low progesterone across the board, and we fix that and they're fine. They no longer fit that diagnostic criteria. So sometimes the simple answer, like a simple solution, is all that's needed, and also if it's not, there's so much more that can be done.
So much more.
Yeah. So I'm gonna take a breath.
That was a masterclass.
It impacts everything. So I really feel like it's an important conversation. But outside of all of that, what's another really key thing people need to know about PMDD?
So one thing we know as far as characteristics go with PMDD is that there is a degree of neuroinflammation or brain inflammation, if we can just simplify that term a little.
I love the word neuro.
Neuro, I know it rolls off the tongue really nicely, doesn't it?
Do you know there's a thing, a thing where you're attracted to intelligent people?
Yes, sapiosexual.
Yeah.
I am one.
I think I'm one too.
Yes, so hot.
Even if I don't know what the F they're talking about, I
know. The fact that they do and they're so passionate about it, it's very attractive.
Oh,
yeah, I love it 10. Too.
That and a good sense of humour and like wit.
Yes. Actually, speaking of which, I know my brain's inflamed when I lose my sense of humour.
Okay, noted.
I'll miss jokes. Like
you have missed some jokes at times from me because I'm a witty person.
You're such a witty person.
And when you have been a bit inflamed.
Yes, that's on me, darling.
Took a minute.
Not you.
Okay, good. I'm glad my material is not.
No, your material's top tier. It's if I ever don't get it, it's a me thing.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I totally brain for me. It typically relates to when I've had sleep challenges. I'm definitely feeling a bit neuroinflamed at the moment. So,
all right, so we might have to
just watch me
edit in some audience laughs.
Probably some canned laughter like they do from the sitcoms. Yeah. So, well, look, brain inflammation, lots of things can cause brain inflammation, including lack of sleep and stress, which I'm definitely experiencing at the moment.
Don't know what you're talking about.
We will circle back to that conversation another time, I promise. But with PMDD, it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. So, low estrogen, high estrogen, low progesterone, all of those things can contribute to an inflammatory load in the brain. And it's is it hormones that are affecting the brain inflammation? But brain inflammation also affects the way hormone signaling occurs. So it's arguably both, and treating both areas are going to be really helpful. But what we know is, first of all, systemic inflammation, we can see inflammatory cytokines cross the blood-brain barrier causing neuroinflammation, but local inflammation's a problem too. And regardless of the source, some of the main drivers behind that are insulin resistance, which we just talked about on the PCOS podcast, gut imbalances, leaky gut, leaky brain, hormonal stuff, circadian dysregulation, which I still just want to get really...
We're on a time limit.
I'm going to rein myself in. But circadian dysregulation, I honestly think that's a driver for pretty much everyone, because it's very rare that I have a client come in who've nailed their circadian biology. And I think people have no idea what a significant impact that has. And it's interesting looking at the trajectory of hormonal things and fertility things with the introduction of smart devices, internet, 24-hour TV. So that's a big one. Nutrient deficiencies, obviously, and chronic low-grade inflammation. So when it comes to treating PMDD, it's not just a hormone thing. Sometimes it's less to do with hormones and more to do with other things, but neuroinflammation is always a part of it. And so we always have to put that on the table to address.
Here. Another interesting one that I have seen clinically a lot, though it wasn't until I did some further research into it that I realised it's a thing, is actually the impact of trauma. So there was a 2022 Australian study that showed that 83% of PMDD subjects or people in the study had experienced early life trauma, and emotional abuse being the most common, and that was at 71%.
Wow.
So that's a big deal. That's a high percent. And I would say clinically I have clocked that. I have noticed that. And I can put my hand up to that as well. And it's more of another indication to me that it's so important to heal whatever has not been healed in a safe space with whatever modality that most resonates with you, because I do think that whatever is not felt and expressed gets suppressed and manifests as other symptoms, behavioral, emotional, mental, physical, etc.
Yes.
And, it's only good's going to come of that.
Yes.
So it's we always think that that's important across the board, and sometimes it's really validating and encouraging to see research reflect that, and to give you more of a gentle push when you feel you have the capacity to go down that path and really dig into doing some healing and some therapy there. That it's a really worthwhile thing to do. And I would also, to be fair, say that in a lot of situations we need to get someone's capacity at a place that feels like they can go down that path first. So my encouragement to people would be get some support with elevating your current experience to something that feels a little bit more sustainable first, and then go down the path of opening that kind of can of worms, because I don't know about you, but I've never felt more tired and like things were at the surface when I really did my first or most deepest deep dive into my own trauma or history. And that may have been my experience. I don't work clinically in that space, but I would say, speaking to many clients and hearing many stories, I feel that often when you go down that path, things feel a lot more at the surface and sensitive, and I don't want to say it gets worse before it gets better, but in my experience it felt more overwhelming before it felt more freeing.
Sure.
Yes,
I understand what you mean. There's like a post-stromal, not hangover, but when the body's been holding on to something for so long, that takes a lot of energy. And it's like when you finally put something heavy down, all of a sudden your muscles kind of start screaming at you from the labor that they've been doing. And there is a recuperative period that must occur before you kind of bounce back and get to feel all of the benefits for finally having transmuted that. So I think that's a really good point, actually, just to be mindful of your capacity and sometimes steadying the foundations first and correcting some of those other things before you dive into that, so that you have more capacity to hold it and deal with it and schedule time to process things. And and I'm really not surprised to hear that about early life trauma. And we know that when the body doesn't feel safe, it'll downregulate fertility and ovulation and hormone production. And as you said, everything touches everything. It affects sleep, causes brain inflammation. Your brain might be sending all the right signals, but then your receptors can't actually respond to the neurotransmitters properly because inflammation's blunting receptor sensitivity. So yes, it's a shame sometimes it'll take conditions like this to have someone actually put the spotlight on trauma that maybe hasn't been taken care of yet, but it is one of those things that I almost think makes a more profound difference than supplements, herbs. You cannot underestimate the impact of trauma, emotions that are trapped in the body, and the energy and that it takes to carry those things unprocessed. And I think that flows on really nicely to the last thing I want to share, and that is the relationship with sleep, because everything touches everything. And like we've said, hormones influence brain health and sleep and mood, and so does trauma, and so does nutrient deficiencies. And women with PMDD have shown a blunted or a delayed nocturnal melatonin secretion. I mean, that just simply means elevated cortisol, dysregulated circadian biology. But you can have the light environment corrected and still have dysregulated circadian biology due to stress. So even if you're eating before sunset and you're not being exposed to blue light and you're getting enough morning sunlight, you will have this so-called maladaptive response due to elevated cortisol, which then suppresses melatonin secretion and binding. So all of that is tied up in there, and of course it influences each other. If you have suboptimal melatonin production, that's a result also potentially of suboptimal serotonin production, which is potentially a result of, insufficient tryptophan or early morning light or both, or nutrient deficiencies that affect the enzymes that drive the conversion of one to the other. So there's and definitely in there is B6, which we know is tied up in hormones and stress. So there's a lot of little bits and pieces. Thankfully, however, research does show that supplemental melatonin can be really clinically useful as a way of it's not a perfect pill, if you like, especially if you haven't addressed elevated cortisol later in the day, because that will interrupt melatonin binding. But it can A, help to reprogram your circadian biology, and B, it can stand in for your own endogenously produced melatonin while you're working on those other things. And I think, I always sort of rate, there's a hierarchy of things that I address in a client, which I very rarely deviate from, and sleep is number one. Everything feels 10 times harder if you're not getting enough sleep. It literally across the board, energy, cognitive function, mood, ability to make good decisions, things like that. So yeah, obviously there's other herbs and nutrients that can help with sleep and that are crucial for someone dealing with disordered sleep patterns for any kind of reason. But amongst all of that, melatonin is definitely a tool that I sometimes get clients to look at.
Love me some melatonin. And speaking of tools, I think in a very quick nutshell, because we don't have time to go into the treatment of it in detail, plus hopefully what you've gotten from this is treatment should be individualized. I really think, sure, you can nail some foundations that are important across the board with PMDD, but my personal belief is due to how nuanced it can be within an individual, even under the same umbrella diagnosis of PMDD. I really think it's an important thing that you have one-to-one support on outside of the foundation. So the kinds of things that we would be addressing would be, encouraging someone towards a anti-inflammatory, low refined carbohydrate diet. A lot of the foundations that I think a lot of people already know from listening to our episodes, though we will maybe define that in future episodes. Get some hormone testing done that is well timed. I have a free resource available on my website, or you can just click the link in my Instagram bio and sign up to my newsletter and you get the free hormone testing guide. So if you want to know when to test your hormones and what those optimal ranges are, go for it. Address nutrient deficiencies, so getting a really good, thorough nutrient test and general pathology test done and interpreted not by the doctor but by someone who's looking at it through the lens of optimal health and the relationship of the markers to each other, not just are you going to drop dead tomorrow or do you have a serious disease. And I'd also say sort out any gut issues that you have, because your efforts will be not very well returned if you've got a lot of gut issues or unmanaged or not fully addressed gut issues going on, because if you've got an inflamed gut, you've got an inflamed brain.
Yep.
And that has flow-on effects to this whole experience. Make use of both herbs and nutrients. I have to tell you that one of the main reasons that I chose to study naturopathy after already being a dietitian and a functional nutritionist and already working in the space was I felt like without herbs I was operating with one hand behind my back when it came to managing things like PMS and PMDD. And that was one of probably the main reason why I studied it was I was like, I can't not use herbs for hormones. They respond so well, and to brain inflammation and gut issues, I just can't speak more highly of them when they're used properly.
Yes.
And then also if you choose to go down the pharmaceutical route, whether that is by itself or as an adjunct, just make sure that you understand why that's been prescribed to you, because I do see that a lot of people get prescribed certain things, whether that is SSRIs, SRNIs, certain hormonal contraceptives, and don't have a positive experience, or do and don't understand why. And sometimes there can be hints within your positive or negative response to that as to what might be driving your PMDD. So that's really important. And yeah, I think don't delay getting the support, even though it's cyclical, because yes, it passes, but it comes around again. And it's not just the 2 weeks or 1 week that you're experiencing those debilitating symptoms. It's all of the repair of the rupture that has to happen as a consequence of that. It's all the ways that that affects your confidence, your relationships, your sense of self, your just whole life is impacted by it. So it's not a matter of if I can put up with it, I should. It can be helped, it can be supported, and often a holistic approach works really well. So maybe this is your sign to book a consult with one of us for some support, or another trusted practitioner that is in your world. But whatever you do, if this is your experience, then please do something, because you deserve to have a much smoother cycle than you're currently experiencing.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just say in closing, the drivers behind PMDD are also going to eventually impact other things in your body too. So even if you can ride it out or put up with it, you deserve better for a start. But second of all, whatever's behind that is going to have a domino effect into the rest of your life too. So put yourself first, get some help, and yeah, you deserve to feel your very best at any time of the month.
All right, we'll see you next week.
See you, friends. Bye.